Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we talk about all the places you wish you were, but maybe, just maybe, shouldn't be. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment your favorite place, the one you're daydreaming about while we unpack why visiting some others might be a tad tricky or, straight up impossible. Look, the world is a big, beautiful, incredibly complicated tapestry of cultures and, let's be honest, sometimes outright chaos. And while we'd all love to believe in a world without borders, the reality is, some doors are slammed shut, bolted, and maybe even have a strongly worded note taped to them. Today we're diving headfirst into those do not enter signs and exploring 10 countries that are, shall we say, less than welcoming to US passport holders. Here we go. Russia. Land of vodka, borscht, those nesting dolls that always feel a little too judgmental. And also a whole heap of political tension that's thicker than a bowl of cold borscht, actually. The relationship between the US and Russia has always been a bit frosty, to say the least. But ever since the whole Crimea situation back in 2014, and the disagreements over Ukraine, things have gotten a tad more complicated than securing a simple tourist visa. The US government has slapped a whole bunch of sanctions on Russia. Think of it like grounding a teenager, but instead of taking away their phone, we're talking about economic restrictions that would make your average oligarch weep into their caviar. Unfortunately, those sanctions have made it incredibly difficult for Americans to get visas, and even if you manage to snag one, the whole process is about as much fun as a root canal performed by a bear wearing oven mitts. So yeah, maybe hold off on booking that Trans-Siberian Railway trip for now. Next up, we're jetting over to Saudi Arabia, a country that's basically the geopolitical equivalent of that friend who's loaded, always at the center of the drama, and has a really complicated relationship with their parents. Now, Saudi Arabia and the US have a long and, let's face it, often messy history. We need their oil, they need our military hardware, it's a whole thing. But lately things have gotten a bit strained, to say the least. The US has this nasty habit of calling out human rights abuses, and let's just say Saudi Arabia hasn't been exactly winning any Humanitarian of the Year awards lately. There's also the whole issue of Yemen, which is currently experiencing a humanitarian crisis that's about as much fun as a barrel of oil on fire. And look, I'm not saying you can't find beauty and culture in Saudi Arabia, but between the human rights concerns, the geopolitical tensions, and the fact that you might accidentally stumble onto the set of a very intense episode of House of Saud, it's probably best to admire this particular corner of the world from afar. Well, this one's going to be a short chapter, folks. Not because there's not a lot to say about North Korea, oh boy there is, but because, well, Americans simply can't go there. Full stop. End of story. North Korea, as you may have heard, is a bit of an enigma, shrouded in secrecy and ruled by a regime that makes your average HOA president look like a laid-back hippie. The US and North Korea have been locked in a staring contest of epic proportions since, well, basically forever. The US government has imposed a travel ban on North Korea, which is basically the geopolitical equivalent of saying, you can't sit with us in the cafeteria of international relations. So, yeah, maybe stick to watching documentaries about this one, preferably ones that don't land you in a North Korean labor camp for subversive media consumption. Next up, Iran, a country with a rich, complex history and stunning architecture, but US-Iran relations are strained, with sanctions and geopolitical tensions. The US Department of State issues travel advisories about Iran. Maybe save this trip for later. And now folks, we arrive at a truly heartbreaking entry on our list, Syria. This once vibrant nation, home to ancient ruins, bustling cities, and a rich tapestry of cultures, has been ravaged by a civil war that's been raging for over a decade. The images coming out of Syria are truly gut-wrenching: bombed-out buildings, displaced families, a generation of children who have known nothing but conflict. The US government, quite understandably, has issued a travel ban on Syria, making it illegal for American citizens to visit without special permission. And frankly, even if you could get in, why would you want to? Syria is currently a war zone, and traveling there would be incredibly dangerous. We're talking about the very real risk of getting caught in crossfire, kidnapped, or worse. It breaks my heart to say this, but for now, the best way to help the people of Syria is to support organizations providing humanitarian aid and to advocate for a peaceful resolution to the conflict. Hopefully one day, Syria will once again be a place where travelers can experience its beauty and history firsthand. From one conflict zone to another, we now find ourselves in Yemen, a country grappling with what is widely considered the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Years of civil war, compounded by famine, disease, and a staggering lack of basic necessities, have left millions of Yemenis in desperate need of aid. The situation in Yemen is nothing short of catastrophic. Imagine a country where hospitals have been bombed, clean water is scarce, and children are dying from preventable diseases. The U.S. government, citing the extreme dangers posed by the ongoing conflict and the dire humanitarian situation, has issued a travel ban on Yemen. And again, for once, I'm not going to argue with them. Traveling to Yemen right now would be not only reckless, but also morally unconscionable. This is a time for the international community to step up, provide aid, and pressure all parties involved in the conflict to find a peaceful resolution. Our journey through the world's no-go zones now takes us to Libya, a country that's been synonymous with turmoil and instability for over a decade. After the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya descended into chaos, with rival factions vying for control and militias running rampant. The situation in Libya is incredibly complex and dangerous. Imagine a country with two rival governments, multiple armed groups, and a thriving human trafficking network. The U.S. government, understandably concerned about the safety of its citizens, has issued a travel ban on Libya. And given the current state of affairs, that's unlikely to change anytime soon. Traveling to Libya right now would be like volunteering to be an extra in a Mad Max movie, except instead of water, everyone's fighting over control of oil fields. Next up, we find ourselves off the coast of East Africa, in Somalia, a country that's become synonymous with piracy, famine, and a level of instability that would make even the most seasoned war correspondent think twice. Somalia has been plagued by civil war for decades, and the central government has struggled to exert control over much of the country. Add to that a severe drought, widespread famine, and the constant threat of attacks by the terrorist group Al-Shabaab, and you've got a recipe for a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions. The U.S. government has issued a travel ban on Somalia, and honestly, can you blame them? Traveling to Somalia right now would be like trying to sail a paper boat through a hurricane while dodging pirates armed with RPGs. Well folks, we've reached a country that probably needs no introduction, but let's give it one anyway: Afghanistan. After 2 decades of U.S.-led intervention, the Taliban swept back into power in 2021, plunging Afghanistan into uncertainty and prompting a mass exodus of Afghans desperate to escape the new regime. The situation in Afghanistan is incredibly complex and rapidly evolving. The Taliban, despite their promises of moderation, have imposed a strict interpretation of Islamic law, particularly targeting women's rights and freedom of expression. The U.S. government has made it abundantly clear Afghanistan is not a place for Americans right now. Traveling to Afghanistan under Taliban rule would be like trying to have a rational conversation with a brick wall while wearing a Make America Great Again hat. And finally, we arrive at our last stop on this whirlwind tour of places Americans can't travel: Venezuela. Once a country synonymous with oil wealth and Caribbean beauty, Venezuela has been in a freefall for years, plagued by hyperinflation, food shortages, and a political crisis that's left the country deeply divided. The situation in Venezuela is a cautionary tale of how quickly things can unravel. Imagine a country where a cup of coffee costs a week's wages, where hospitals lack basic medical supplies, and where people are literally starving to death. The U.S. government has issued a travel ban on Venezuela, and while it pains me to say it, this is one Caribbean getaway you're going to have to put on hold for the foreseeable future. Well folks, there you have it. 10 countries where your American passport won't get you very far. It's a sobering reminder that the world can be a dangerous and unpredictable place, and that sometimes the safest and most responsible thing to do is stay home. But hey, don't despair. There are still plenty of amazing and welcoming destinations out there for adventurous American travelers. Just maybe stick to countries that aren't actively at war, facing humanitarian crises, or ruled by regimes that might mistake your fanny pack for a subversive act of Western imperialism. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and comment your favorite place. Stay safe and see you in the next video.